And at the same time, like, to what end? Because at some point, it's got to end. One person's going to make it.
But if this is all pointless, right, then these moments matter in the same. It's like that. It's, you know, that existentialist question of like, if there is no purpose to life, we have to create it for ourselves. Welcome, friends, to episode 361 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm writer Luke Elliott.
And I'm filmmaker James Bailey.
And this week we discuss Richard Bachman's 1977 novel, The Long Walk. So here we are, James, with our first ever Bachman novel. The Long Walk is a bleak novel, quite dystopian, and really quite interesting to me. I don't know, what did you think about it?
I mean, yeah, I think there's a lot of commentary being made here about, you know, certain types of power systems. But in general, it's a really simple premise that kept me way more engaged than I was expecting. Like, I assume that there's going to be some interesting things that happen along the way, but the premise is just, it's basically an endurance marathon. Who can make it the longest?
Yeah, it's really got this reality TV vibe, but there's a lot of social commentary, like you said. I think it is a commentary on masculinity, commentary on power structures, lots of things like that. Very, very interesting sort of, it's not even subtext, because a lot of it is like just in the text. But there is also some thematic subtext and stuff, which we'll be able to talk about. But I wanted to hit you with some background on Bachman real quick.
Yeah, first time, very interested in this guy, right?
Yeah.
Like, I know he's been on the list for a while.
Yeah, it's been on the list for a while. So Bachman was born in New York and served a 4-year stint in the Coast Guard, which he then followed with 10 years in the Merchant Marine. He finally settled down in rural central New Hampshire, where he ran a medium-sized dairy farm and wrote at night.
Wow.
His fifth novel was dedicated to his wife, Claudia Inez Bachman, who also received credit for his author photo on the book jacket. The Bachmans had one child, a boy, who died in an unfortunate accident at the age of 6 when he fell into a well and drowned. In 1982, a brain tumor was discovered near the base of Bachman's brain, and tricky surgery removed it. But Bachman unfortunately died in late 1985 of, quote, cancer of the pseudonym, a rare form of schizonomia, which is, of course, when the pseudonym was revealed to be that for Stephen King, which I'm sure you all know.
Everybody knew that. We have books on the background that say his name on it, so of course we
only if you're on video.
But we got you. We tricked you.
I thought it'd be a little fun to have with that, because Stephen King definitely had fun with it, right? Like he wrote under the pseudonym for years. Before it was finally discovered that he and Bachman were one and the same. And he did develop this really elaborate backstory, which was like given to his publisher to send out to the public. And like these little factoids came out, the death of a child, a brain tumor, like some pretty interesting things to claim happened to this fictional character. And he even had this photo in these books that I forget who it was. It was like a friend of the publisher or something, like a mechanic. I heard him say, and they got to use his picture for the dust jacket. So yeah, really pretty elaborate stuff by King here as he tried to develop this pseudonym.
I remember being so fascinated with this when I learned that King did this. I mean, I was young, very young, when I heard of Richard Bachman and the whole story.
That's probably the first like pseudonym I heard of. Like honestly,
I think so.
I mean,
yeah,
maybe something in school for like a classic author, but. It's it's like one of the most modern ones for sure.
And it was like, you know, people would talk about it. We're talking about it, and then in the same breath, we're like, but he, you know, secret. And I wonder this too, because I was always under the assumption that like some people, it was like rumored, and some people were picking up on it a little bit, and like it wasn't like this big blowout thing where it was like revealed.
Yeah,
I think the people who were King fans were kind of in the know at some point, and they were like, maybe, I don't know. I wasn't around when it happened, but that's what I thought was going on.
So I listened to him talk about this, and I read a bunch of things he wrote about it. There was an intro to the book we have that talks about it, and in one of those he said that there were people who would write him letters from the beginning, asking him if he was Bachman. and he would never confirm it or not, but he sort of compared it to he had this story about the Beatles who tried to play one time in disguise, and they were going to wear masks, and they were going to go to this bar and play, and I forget who it was. It was like their manager or something was like, well, they're going to know it's you as soon as they hear your voice. And he kind of compared that to himself, and that he has a distinct voice, and then maybe he thought he could hide it a little better than he did, it sounds like.
That's the most fun thing about this, I think, is that like it truly was an avenue for King to explore doing work in a different way.
Yeah.
And like this, at the beginning of the story, I think it's a collection of Bachman stories that this book is in.
Yeah, there's now like a 4-part Bachman novels collection you can get. This is kind of a short novel in and of itself. I've heard some people call it a novella, but really it's longer than that. It's just like a short novel.
Feels like a novel. Maybe a novella for Stephen King.
For Stephen King standards, yeah.
But we, I mean, just hearing what was talked about at the beginning, and this is like an audiobook thing. I mean, like, obviously doing both. In the audiobook, he compared it to, and I think it was from another author, of like being like, I'm Richard Bachman on rainy days. Like, so it's like a mood related, like a mode of writing, a mode of storytelling, that it's like maybe bleaker, because I think he even talked about how, like,
I think these books are considered more pessimistic and kind of almost darker in tone, which is funny to say considering, Stephen King is a horror writer.
Right. Well, he said like something about like the internal like compass of like optimism versus like not pessimism. And like there's something there with Stephen King and Richard Bachman. And I think that's really fun to explore. And it's such a cool way to like distinguish those two things. Yeah. And I had a great time with this.
And if I could play, a little bit of armchair psychologist, I thought it was interesting that he notes or he came up with the death of a fictional child, where we had read when we covered, I believe it was Pet Sematary, how there was a close call with one of his own sons who was almost hit in a similar manner to a character in Pet Sematary. And he sort of wrote Pet Sematary as a reaction to that, like imagining what his grief would have been like. But I like the idea of Bachman as being sort of this alter ego who did lose a son, and him maybe thinking like what that might have done to me and made me a little more pessimistic about the world, and maybe this is how I would view things. I don't know. I haven't heard him say that, but that's just kind of like me reading between the lines here a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a cool way to go about doing this, because I think other people have done pen names for similar reasons.
I'm sure there has been done. I mean, there's lots of reasons people might do pseudonyms. A lot of times, especially historically, women would use them because there was a stigma against being a woman who was an author, and you would sell less, especially if you were writing
genres, for sure.
If you were trying to write certain genres. Yeah, there's people who use them even to this day, just because like they have a day job where they don't want it to be known that they're also writing these books. Maybe the subject matter would be objectionable to people that they have to deal with in the business world, or what have you. That for whatever reason they want to distance their professional lives and their actual lives. So there's a lot of valid reasons to use them. People use them to write in different genres sometimes, just to avoid just like carryover, having fan expectations. Maybe if they're a fan of like your series and you're writing something that's very, very different, sometimes you'll distance yourself that way. But he had some slightly different reasons. It seems like he was writing. He's kind of Sanderson before Sanderson was doing this, but like he was writing so fast that his publishers were like, "Hey, we can't be putting out more than one book a year." That was kind of like the common knowledge in the 70s, I guess. We can't be putting out more than one book a year. You'll be flooding the market and sort of competing against yourself. So if you want to publish other books, you might need to develop a pseudonym so that we can do this. And so he said, okay. And he kind of came with Richard Bachman on the fly, from what I heard.
How is that not still competing books though?
Well, because they're in slightly different genres, I think.
Okay. Yeah.
So he developed the pseudonym. Richard was like a reference to a crime writer that he really liked, Richard Stark. Bachman was just a reference to this Bachman Turner Overdrive, which was a rock and roll band which he was listening to at the time. So he just was like, I'm just gonna go with these two things, put it together. Richard Bachman. He originally had developed a name, Gus Pillsbury, which was a reference to his maternal grandfather's name. But at the last moment, it was outed that was him. So like it was like his fans already kind of knew that Gus Pillsbury was him, so he had to just develop a new one.
All credit to the fact that he was trying to reference a family member, but that's objectively a worse name.
Richard Bachman's definitely better.
I think that it's interesting because it's like, those random name generator kind of things, and like that's how Childish Gambino, like Donald Glover came up with his name. Childish Gambino is like a name generator kind of thing, from what I understand.
That's pretty wild.
So this is like the classic version of that. This is the Stephen King doing his random name generator and figuring this one out.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk more about the Bachman novels, and we'll talk about that as like sort of a phase of his career, his alter ego. But before we get into all of that, let's do what we normally do and give a little bit more general thoughts about this book. What was it like for you? This is a return to King, but albeit through a different avenue. How did you like this book compared to the other books by him we've read?
Yeah, every time we cover King, I have to, just in case people are not aware, our first ever project was back in 2017.
He's our most covered author, I think, to date.
And I think any podcast about adaptations, that would be the case, because he's
makes sense, right?
so adapted. He's so well, he's beloved. He's an icon of horror. He's all of this great work, and I just always really engage with his material, and this was no different. I think I didn't want to, in the Richard Bachman kind of fun we were having before, I didn't want to say too much, but now we're into Stephen King, and it's simple premise, strong character work, and giving us some sort of societal allegories and just often cycles of trauma or violence and things like that. And it's this is Stephen King all over. Yeah. And of course I knew that, I'm hearing the movie's getting great reviews. I've never read this book before, so I didn't know what to expect. But the idea of I'm like, oh, okay, so they're walking down the road. But it was, like I said, it's so engaging the way that we're going into flashbacks of characters, and we're getting the context for why they're doing the walk and the world, the greater world. It's this big endurance competition, and we think everybody's going to peel off, but it really is the coming together of a lot of these young, I think they're all men, and so they're all coming together. At least a few of them are helping each other out, even though they're against each other. And it really made me think about another project that we covered on the podcast. Can you guess what I'm going to say?
Hunger Games?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It made me think about this is prototype for Hunger Games, right?
Sure.
This idea of a game of sorts that really why would anybody enter into this? And in the case of the Hunger Games, I guess it's a draft, but I think this was maybe dealing with that sort of thing as well. Some people seem like they were doing it on a whim, and I think the different personalities you could tell, but there's a reveal near the end of the story why one character is doing it.
Seemed a lot of people were sort of pressured into it societally.
Right. And people are so rabid for it, and they're so this is the pastime of America in this alternate timeline, whatever's going on here. And this is what people they all engage with it. And it feels like gladiator games. It feels like those kind of things where the base instincts kick in, and people just, I don't know what it is about seeing people fight or whatever it is. But this is that sort of that endurance contest, and all along the way, I just was fascinated by the kind of side routes that we would take to then come back, and the way that the characters are breaking down mentally, physically, and the book is kind of mirroring that as we get closer. And I've watched some documentaries on ultramarathon running, and I mean it's grueling, right? And you become you go through so many phases, and there's the hallucination phase, and you're going through these, you're pushing bodies beyond what you even think they're capable of. And I think that this is I don't remember, 70 something, right? This book came out
77 is when it was published.
It's interesting to see King sort of tapping into all those different things well before I think ultra marathoning was the thing. I think maybe marathons were, but not like they are today.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe it was a thing. Maybe I don't know. But I'm sure he did tons of research into endurance sports, like you said. Maybe went on a couple of really long walks for himself just to see how it felt.
Sure.
I imagine you would do that.
It's funny because I even considered, I have a standing desk that I'm working at right now, and a treadmill, and I'm maybe I do the whole next episode for the film. I
didn't know you had the treadmill. I knew you had the standing desk. You got a treadmill under the desk. It might be too noisy for our audio or something, but maybe not. I don't know.
I'll think about it, but it would be funny because I know that that's something they did for the marketing of the film as well, right?
Yeah,
It's if you can keep up the walk, you can finish the film. And
it seems very fun. We'll have to talk about that next week when we get to the film, but there's a lot to dive into in this book. Like you said, this is one of our favorite authors, and I was curious to see, because this is a very early Bachman novel. I don't think it's the first one that was published under his name. I believe Rage came out first. This actually was one of the first novels he ever wrote. He talks about how there were 5 novels he wrote before publishing Carrie, 2 of which he said were any good, and that was Rage and The Long Walk. So he used Bachman as an avenue to publish some of his early works that he liked, that had been rejected, by the way, as Stephen King. In fact, Rage was very nearly his debut novel, but ended up being rejected, and it ended up being Carrie instead, which, of course, like...
The rest is history.
The rest is history, like, because that
amazing.
was such a massive success right out the gates, and it sort of established who he was as an author, made him a horror icon. Whereas Rage, I don't know if you know anything about that book, but it's about a school shooting, and quite different, very dark, but not really like horror in the classic sense. And very controversial, and it's one of his only books that he has pulled from publication. And there's like a dark history behind that. There was a killer, like a school shooter, who ended up like having a copy in his bag or something, and so King ended up pulling it because he didn't want anybody to be inspired by it. It kind of lines up with this Bachman as the more pessimistic, dark sort of alter ego version of himself. But yeah, the Long Walk. He started writing in the 60s when he was still like a teenager, and like an early like a freshman when he was in undergrad. Early on in his collegiate career, he was writing this book. And so it's really interesting to think of it that way. Now, I'm sure he revised it. Obviously, this is published in 1977, so years later, goes through some revisions, and I think probably polished up to be on par prose-wise with like where King was at that point in his career. But still, I think a lot of the psyche of like a really young Stephen King is sort of shining through here. This is someone like who he was writing this before he'd ever met his wife, or his future wife. This is just very early him, and it's really interesting to see what all is present there that has become such a like hallmark of his style. His really insightful sort of social analysis, like the way he looks at the world and at these characters, the way he writes dirtbags, and the way he makes people feel so real. He loves to find the like nasty detail that just makes it feel like he's giving it to you like honest, like he really sort of sells that he's giving you an honest look at these people, and he's not shying away from the stuff that like maybe you shouldn't mention in like polite company,
Definitely he loves the taboos. And like, I think this book is really interesting, and like a young King, like thinking about like I didn't realize how young he was.
Yeah.
And it's so much about like sexuality, and like there's like a general horniness to the story.
Absolutely.
Obviously,
I was surprised at how horny this book is, but I think in retrospect, after finishing it and like looking back at its overall messaging, I think it makes sense, because so much of what we talked about with masculinity is tied up in this, and such a big part of it, like especially young masculinity when you're a teenager. A lot of people are obviously like starting to explore sexuality at that age. There's a reason that all these guys seem like they're so horny even on this walk.
It was wild. Like, honestly, like even after the fact, I understand kind of what was going on and why, but at the same time, wild stuff was happening. Like in terms of like just like the thoughts were either a flashback or something like that, or they're seeing a woman horny. Yeah. They're thinking about this girl horny. Like all this, it was really
Freudian and sort of Oedipal at times.
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
Like
that's a great description for it.
Yeah. It's I think he's getting at like the way sexuality is used. Like there's all this talk about the rabbit and the carrot, and how you get men to do things, and how you get dogs to run, and how you motivate people. And I think specifically here, motivate young men to do something that is against their self-interest. I think I've seen this elsewhere, so I'm not going to claim credit for this, but he was writing this at a time during Vietnam, a war in which Stephen King was against. And a lot of people have looked at this and said, this is him working through his feelings on being against the Vietnam War, which was sort of unpopular with like a big part of society viewed you as weak if you weren't pro war behind the soldiers, right? But then like that war like progressed for so long. This is one of the first times where America is like seeing the violence and seeing the effects of this on their TVs, and it was a grueling, sort of pointless exercise, especially looking back on it, which he would have been by the time 77 rolls around. So I think there's a lot of parallels to this grueling, long, pointless sort of exercise that this book ends up being, as far as the violence that is being inflicted on these boys.
And you're saying 77, but that's when it was published, right? Because he was writing it in the 60s,
right.
Meaning that it was pretty active.
Yeah, and again, like he's probably revising it in the following
sure.
years, but like, yeah.
But the idea of it being something that he was writing and dealing with then, and that makes so much sense because like I was picking up. I felt like there's obviously you've got like this general that's like the head of all of this, and I was getting like a military. It felt kind of military in terms of that.
This is directly about like the military for sure,
right? But even like the groups of young men, right? Mm-hmm. And so you start to form these bonds, and then like you're losing friends along the way.
Last time America had a draft, right? So a bunch of young men were just drafted into the military and had to go fight in this war that they maybe didn't believe in.
It makes a lot of sense, though, that's what he was reacting to.
Yeah, and the method around how you get into the long walk, it's like kind of draft-like. We'll get into it, but some interesting things there. And like the more I thought about this book, the more I liked it. Like I don't know, I really enjoyed. Like I like a bleak book, I like a dark book. I've talked about how like The Road by Cormac McCarthy is one of my favorite books. Like I love that book, and I've never shied away from really dark and bleak stories, as long as they like have a reason for it. And I feel like this book does. Like maybe at first glimpse you don't understand like why, but I think when you take it out as a whole and you reflect on it and you start seeing the reasons why and what he was going for here, I was kind of shocked at how well it holds up, especially considering this was maybe the first book he ever wrote, or among the first books he ever wrote for sure.
That's the thing that I'm reacting to. Like I didn't realize that it was that early for him. So like I'm reacting to that now, thinking about how this is pre-It. It's pre The Shining.
Yep.
And yet, like, even if this is the first book he ever wrote, the fact that he is so clear about like what his intentions were, like in the story, I can see like the bones of everything that he was hoping to get out of the story. I think he accomplished. I think like not everybody can pull off a simple premise, but like it's so interesting right away. You're like, why would you write a story about a marathon?
Yeah, you just know like so one of the things I love about this book too is that it shows some real restraint, because we've talked about how like the world seems like it's kind of dystopian. I think it's confirmed to be an alternate history, but you don't know that at the beginning. And what I liked about it is how restrained he is in feeling the need to like explain why what is happening. And instead we get just like a little bit of preamble, and then we're on the walk. And we're like meeting these guys. We're like meeting the characters as they're walking. We're like learning about the world through flashbacks and through observations of the countryside and through conversations characters are having with each other. We start piecing together some things. There's talk about the Axis powers like bombing the eastern coast of the U.S., which is something that never happened. So like we start learning about certain things that never occurred, and you're like, okay, this is an alternate history. Where it seems like maybe the Axis powers won World War II, so maybe this is a more like fascist version of America. Unclear. That's not confirmed, but I feel like we're hinting at a lot of this, and maybe like in Stephen King's like larger sort of multiverse, maybe this is it's like similar to other books. I don't know. I'm not like big enough Stephen King. Like I haven't read enough of his books to be able to tell you if that's true or not.
You're not a professor of Stephen King
not yet.
lore yet.
Working on
we're
it,
getting there. Yeah, but I guess my point with all of that was also just to say like it's a confident book if it's the first one he ever wrote. Like it feels very intentional and well thought out in terms of what he wanted to accomplish and how he was able to get it done. When again, that simple premise isn't going to work for everybody, but he always has these interesting characters and good character work and like different ways that people are interacting or things that go on in people's minds that they may not admit to.
Well, I think in his own mind too. Like I think we can see this is a guy who is, he's got this character of Garrity, right? And so he is not king, and I think that's important to remember. But through him, he is definitely working through some of his complicated feelings about his own sexuality, probably, and the pressures he feels around it, and the pressure. Yeah, obviously his thoughts on the war, and like his thoughts on maybe the reality TV culture and sort of game show culture, which was starting to become a big thing in the 70s and like late
game
60s,
shows
early
for sure.
70s. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like it's kind of amazing, like, of course, like where we've seen this go, but even early on, he was starting to have like a reaction to this kind of television, this kind of entertainment.
I mean, it does feel like reality TV, and it wasn't a thing yet. Like it really wasn't in the 70s. Like it was game shows for sure, but this feels like something that like people were tuning into on TV, sort of thing.
Yeah, it was. I will say, like, I thought the TV, because at one point I think it's mentioned that this is all being filmed pretty early on, but I feel like there wasn't a lot of discussions about like film crews or anything. Like it seemed like maybe they're just like checking in every now and then at different stopping points. There would maybe be like stuff. Whereas it's not as much like I would think this would be like a show that they would be filming the whole thing. And there was not that wasn't really something he was engaging with. And again, we're looking at 77, so maybe that's why. And then also I've seen other people say this is in the future, and it could be, but we don't know that. And in fact, like the tech at the time seems like it's probably roughly in line with where the book came out. I think this is just an alternate history where like this version of America looks a little different.
But we do get the sense that it's a spectacle. So people are showing up to it. So rather than maybe some people are watching the checkpoints at home or whatever, but people are showing up, and like they talk about at one point like how crazy it could be. And this isn't actually what happens, but they talk about how crazy it could be, where people are just stacked up, and it's like, you know, New Year's Eve in New York City, like where just people are stacked and they just want to get a glimpse at it. And that was so interesting to me, because if we're talking about an alternate history, like what has pushed society to where this is the only form of entertainment, and it's almost like government sanctioned or government.
Well, we don't know that it's the only form, but
entertainment.
it definitely seems like it's the like primary form or the biggest one. Yeah.
They call it like the pastime of America now, so I have to assume that it's like this is their sport of choice.
Well, like they talk about baseball, so baseball's still a thing. Maybe it's not televised, I don't know.
But it's not. It doesn't seem like it's as popular as this. Like this is the thing.
This is the
that's
thing
like,
for sure.
It's government run, and it's government like it's clear that like this is something that's like controlling the masses in a sense, or I don't know. And that gets into a whole other territory of. And it's so funny because we just covered Starship Troopers, but like this is becoming a trend in like things that we're covering recently. Yeah. And it's just like, hey, these are stories that are saying, watch out for authoritarian regime and like heavy-handed government and oversight and all this other stuff. And it's like, is this just like how I'm reacting to these things right now, or is this, you know, what I have always felt this way? But it does feel timely again, and it feels like something that is.
There's a reason that the movie is being made in 2025, right?
Yeah.
After all these years. All right, man. So let me dive in a little bit to some more background about the Richard Bachman alias, why Stephen King chose it. So we already talked about how he was sort of doing it as a way to be able to publish more books than his publishers thought he should be in a given year. It was also an attempt to make sense of his career. He wanted to try and answer the question of whether or not he was a success due to his luck or his talent. So one of the things he deliberately did with Bachman was he gave them very little marketing presence. He sort of just released them into the public, little fanfare, little bit like just very little marketing. And in fact, he said he did his best he could to load the dice against Bachman. But it was kind of an experiment. He wanted to see how they would do. I heard him say somewhere that the book Thinner sold 28,000 copies in its initial run, which was a decent amount. But once he was outed as Richard Bachman as being king, that book would sell 10 times as many copies.
Sure.
So it kind of initially showed like this book did okay, but also Stephen King is a brand in and of itself at this point, and that popularity is sort of unmatched.
Do you have like the information of how exactly it finally came out?
I do have that. Bachman's early books, Rage, was published in 1977, The Long Walk, 1979, which, wait a minute, I've been saying 77. Did I say 77 in the intro? I think I did. Fuck, possibly. This is 79. I think that might be the first time I've fucked up the intro. All right, I guess it'll just have to stand. We're correcting it here. Got confused with Rage. Rage was 77. The Long Walk is 79. Well, and also it was written long before that in the 60s, so I got confused with that. Road Work, which I have never heard of that book. It was published in 1981, and then The Running Man, 1982, which, by the way, we might return to later this year, so stay tuned for that one.
Yeah.
Only people close to him knew that he was Bachman, right? So he publishes those 4 books before the link between him and his shadow writer was exposed. So in early 1985, a bookstore clerk in Washington, D.C. named Steve Brown noted similarities between the writing styles of King and Bachman. Brown located the publisher's records at the Library of Congress, which included a document naming King as the author of one of Bachman's novels. So he wrote to King's publishers with a copy of the documents he had uncovered and asked them what he should do. 2 weeks later, King called Brown personally and suggested that he write an article about how he discovered the truth and allowed himself to be interviewed for that article. So I thought that was pretty generous.
Sick. Yeah, that's very cool.
Now, I will say he said that he was actually quite upset that it got exposed. So maybe after some time of being upset, he decided to handle it the right way.
2 weeks later, so there's that.
Yeah,
but,
a little bit of
this
time.
is what I'll say. A couple of things I want to react to there. Good on this person, first of all, for having discovered it and going to the publisher and then having that be the avenue. Because I think today it just leaks immediately on Twitter.
Just tweeted about it, yeah.
But like, think about how much like outside of like the marketability of the moment, but how cool that is for an artist to be able to like navigate all these different spaces and say, you know, have a say in how this all comes out, and for it to be such a cool I don't know, interaction. And then moving forward, you get like, obviously King's like, I killed him. Like I murdered this guy basically with giving him a disease, and it's just like a fun way to go about it. Whereas now it's on Twitter immediately, and like people are trying to figure out who's Sleep Token. You know what I mean? Like it's just these things, like secrets can't stay these days.
It's really hard to do these days for sure. Yeah, the public almost has to buy into it because it's like you can't keep it a secret. You'll be found out eventually. So anyway, so the thing that's interesting here, another book that we have covered. Stephen King was working on Misery when this happened, a book that he planned to publish as Bachman.
Wow.
So that originally was planned to be a Bachman novel.
So I wonder if that means that the end of the story was going to be different, or if it was, I mean, it is a bleaker King story in general.
Well, and remember we talked about how it was all about his relationship to his fans. So maybe he thought releasing it as Bachman would give it a little bit more of a little bit of distance from the Stephen King fandom. Whereas like publishing as King is very direct, like talking about his own fans. But yeah, maybe that wasn't the initial plan, but he ended up going that way.
I also like the idea too of like the way that King navigated this is like he is at such a level of success that he's like, I will write these stories, and whether they do well or not, they'll be released as Richard Bachman, who was this nobody.
He says he has like a particular mania. He's like, there's some sort of mania about me where I have to publish books even if I don't need the money. Because he's like, at the time I was doing incredibly well. I didn't need the money, but I just like wanted to do it. He just had this need to get these books out there. And I think he wanted to see how they would do sort of apart from the brand that he had built. That was Stephen King.
I think it's like love of the game at that point, right? Like you're so far invested that you're like, I'm successful, I'm good. I don't need I could get another house with this next book. It's like you said, 10x the number of sales when you have the King name attached to it. So it's
imagine being like, I'm going to choose to sell 1/10 the amount that I could.
That's
just
absurd.
as like almost like a pride thing.
Yeah.
Now, I will say initially his publishers did ask for this, but I bet eventually it was more of a thing he just decided to keep up. And like you said in that introduction, he kind of talked about how he almost had this like persona in mind that he had developed for Bachman, and when he wrote as Bachman, he felt a little different, and he really seemed like he was having fun with that.
Well, it's such a writer thing to do to go out of your way to create backstory for your pseudonym, for your pen name, like to go that far and to create this whole story. Like I'm sure that was really fun and like performative in a way. But he also, in that intro that we listened to before the audiobook, he talks about like a story that he would eventually go on to write that I forget the name of right now, but it's like like a split personality.
I was about to get into that.
Okay.
Well, I don't know about the split personality thing, but I was about to say he did publish 2 more books as Bachman after he got discovered.
Yeah.
And what he said about these, so the next book he would publish was in 1996 called The Regulators, and the last Bachman book is the 2007 novel Blaze. He described both of these books as having been found or discovered in Bachman's home or in Bachman's like storage, right? Like, so the character was dead, Bachman was dead, and yet these books were sort of unearthed. So you got to have a little bit of fun with that, I think.
Love that. It's so clever and such a fun way to do it.
Yeah. Some people don't really consider those like the true part of the true Bachman novels because they were after it had been discovered. So at that point, it's kind of different, right? It's different when you're knowingly publishing it as Bachman and you're kind of playing into that versus doing it in disguise. I guess you're knowingly doing that as well, but it's just different when like nobody knows you're doing it and you know that they don't know.
Oh, the thing that I was referencing again, I don't know the name of the name of the story, but from what I understand, it's like a writer who's writing under a pen name that like it's like a competing personality sort of thing, and I think the sort of Bachman side overtakes the King side, and there's like a commentary in that, and I think that's what he was talking about, and maybe I haven't read that story, so
sounds like Secret Window, but I don't think that's what it was. I forget, and we have covered Secret Window, which is definitely about a writer with some personality stuff going on there. Something that's clearly has been on his mind several times. So let's talk a little bit about The Long Walk, and then we can move into the bio for it. But this is a dystopian horror novel that he published in 1979. Yeah, he began writing it in 1966 to 1967 during his freshman year at the University of Maine. That was 8 years before his first published novel, Carrie, was released in 1974. So this is a book that is notable in King's career. It has been written about critically quite a bit. Critic Douglas Winter viewed the novel as King's most despairing work, calling it a bleak science-fictional mirror of contemporary America. Reviewers have also categorized the novel as a metaphor for the Vietnam War, which we've talked about. James Smythe of The Guardian connects several elements of the novel to the conflict. Quote, "The televised draft, the horror of seeing new friends die, the seeming lack of reason for it occurring in the first place." So let's move into talking about the plot a little bit here, and we can kind of set the stage and talk about this book. All right, so in a militarized dystopian version of the United States, now consisting of 51 states and governed by a totalitarian regime, a harsh annual competition known as the Long Walk is held. The event is overseen by a figure known only as the Major, a symbol of the oppressive government. Each year, 100 teenage boys are selected from a large pool of applicants to participate. Among them is 16-year-old Ray Garrity from Maine, who recalls attending a previous long walk with his father, a vocal critic of the event who was later, quote, squatted, a term implying execution by the state. Garrity is the sole representative of Maine, and he joins a group of boys including Peter McVries, Art Baker, Collie Parker, and Stebbins, a mysterious loner. The boys are cheered on by the public despite the deadly nature of the contest. All right, so that's the setup. Let's go over the rules, just because I think it's worth establishing them here. Yeah. The rules are simple but unforgiving. The boys must maintain a pace of at least 4 miles per hour, tracked by radar devices and enforced by soldiers riding alongside in a half-track vehicle. Each walker begins with a 120-second timer that counts down as their speed drops below the threshold. Warnings are issued at 90, 60, and 30 seconds, and if the timer reaches 0, the walker is ticketed, aka executed, by the soldiers. Mm-hmm. Warnings can be cleared by maintaining the proper pace for a full hour. Walkers are allowed to bring supplies and help each other, but interference from outsiders is prohibited, and any civilian who tries to assist a walker faces arrest or worse. The walk never stops for any reason, and the contest continues until only one walker remains alive to claim the prize, which is anything he desires for the rest of his life, along with a large sum of money. All right, So that's the setup, and it's an intense one.
Yeah, it definitely is. It's just so funny, like the way that he went about the rules and this idea that like, you get anything you want. And immediately I'm like, so what if you say that you want to be all powerful, topple this government?
I mean, there are surely limitations for what you can get, right? Yeah.
But yeah, it seems like, you're like, oh, you get anything you want. Like, it seems like that would be a reason enough.
Well, it's just ill-defined, right? Like I think on purpose, he just wants it to be like, it's the carrot, right? It's the thing that they're all chasing, which by the way, like that's it's almost a criticism, but like in this world, and I think he did enough by the end sell me on it with like, clearly there's a ton of societal pressure to participate. And even these guys who like, they get accepted, there's like a final date where they can back out, and they all kind of talk about the reasons why they don't. Many people do, but each of them has these moments where like they could have backed out, especially Garrity. And yet it's like his pride takes over. His he would be embarrassed if he were to back out.
Right.
It's like he feels like he has to do it, and it kind of sold me a little bit on it. But like early on, I was like, these guys are all so nonchalant. They seem like they're in such good spirits. Whereas like, I don't care what it is. If you are in a competition where 99 out of 100 people are going to die, and you know that, like, I don't know how you guys aren't all just like fucking in a bleak.
Yeah.
You know, like, I guess his idea is that all these people kind of signed up to be here, so they're in a way, and like, maybe they're all kids, so they're maybe ignorant of this, but like enough of them seem to kind of know how this goes. And it's a brutal, like, this is something they would have seen on TV, right? Like,
yeah, many of them attended and saw it in person.
I can't imagine being there and being in any sort of like,
well, it's a statistics
positive
game.
Emotion at all.
It's a statistics game, because it's like, and it's brought up a few times. It's like, even if you feel like you are the most trained, the most mentally tough, anything can happen. Literally anything
and
can happen.
It does, yeah.
And then you will die.
Yeah.
And you're talking about statistically, like, you have a 1% chance of making it.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't sound like something that would be worth it. And I agree, there's like some believability pushing there, but for me, like, the premise is worth the squeeze, I guess. Like, let's just see how this goes.
Well, it was interesting when we finally got the reveal that his father was literally abducted and probably killed for speaking out against the long walk. That just shows you how much of an institution this is in this society now.
Well, and once you, like, you know, you're saying that King was possibly reacting to Vietnam, right?
Yeah.
Like, so the pressures of that, and like the pride of that, and like we've heard past generations talk about, like, if you know, World War II broke out, you just served. Like, it wasn't even a question. Like, the young men went to serve, and there was like, I very rarely hear stories of young men during that time period that stayed back. There were probably plenty, but it's just like the going sort of idea was that you served, and then you move forward to Vietnam, and it's like, you served, you get drafted. Some people chose to, you know, there was more, I think, hesitance, and I think there was more pushback, and especially within the institution of a draft, like that like was controversial, and there's like controversial reasons why the war was happening. I think people understood the enemy in World War II a little easier. Yeah. And here it's like, you enter into this sort of competition, and you start drawing those allegories for Vietnam, and you're like, okay, like, the pressure to serve, the pressure to you know, to be seen as different, and they feel like they're young. And I think that's something that we've talked about a few times, is like, the military does, just by definition, it young people are brought into it,
who feel like they're invincible.
And there's the legacy of like, if someone else served, like, you need to serve, and you got to do your part.
Sure.
And I think that, again, I don't want to take anything away from how important that is for people who serve, and I appreciate it, and I like, you know, I think that it's an important service. I also think that it's like doing it responsibly, and like as people sending people to war, like, what's the reason? And here the reason is, if we're drawing parallels to Vietnam, the reason is for what? To get anything you want at the end of this, and like, for the entertainment of others. I'm not saying that Vietnam was for the entertainment of others. It's interesting.
Man, we want these episodes to be evergreen, but I can't help but think about the current moment we're in, where, because I agree in everything you just said, and yet you give yourself over to the state when you do it, and you hope that the state will respect that choice and will honor it by giving you, you know, a righteous, justified path. Duty.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And instead, what's going on right now in this country is the president has ordered our troops, actual fighting men and women,
National Guard,
to be deployed in my city, in Portland, Oregon, because he saw some fires on Fox News, basically. He saw some stuff on TV, and it convinced him that this was something that needed to happen. It's insane. A president deploying the military against his own citizens is the definition of fascism. It is like, it can't be any more authoritarian than that. He is deploying them against his political enemies. It's against protesters because he saw some footage he didn't like. It's absurd, and it underlines, I think, like what a book like this is talking about and what a book like Starship Troopers failed to talk about. And that's the inherent problem that happens when you take advantage of that trust someone has put in the system, and you use it for your own gain, for your own power, and you abuse it, and you get people killed, and you enact violence on your behalf. And I think this book is a sort of a much more clear vision of that, because he's looking at a time, right? He's looking at the Vietnam War and saying this is an unjust war. There are people dying that shouldn't be dying. So I don't know. There's some parallels that are uncomfortable, and I just had to lay them out there.
I mean, and I've been thinking about you guys in Portland, obviously. Love that city. And I know that, like, the biggest thing is if we see stuff like this, like, we have to resist that. Like, if the American way is to prevail, if this is an experiment, is to succeed, free speech and the idea of, like, resisting oversight, like government oversight, can't be how we're ruled. And like I'm scared for you guys, and I hope that it's smoke, like it tends to be with this guy. But
well, the one thing is, like, you're talking about, like, all these soldiers, and like a lot of these I mean, literally just today the news came out about him giving this speech to a room full of generals who are all standing there silently, not clapping for him, and he's furious that they're not just clapping for him. He's like, he wants to be adored. And luckily many of them seriously view their positions as apolitical. And that's the thing you have to hope, is that there's some measure of restraint being shown, because it is clear that he wants violence. He is calling for full force, quote unquote. He wants people to be shot. And it's just the fact that he can't physically make people do it. He wants them to. He can order them to. But I think a lot of people who are actually on the ground have sworn oaths, right, to the Constitution and to their office, and they know that there are certain things that apply to them, and you hope that that will stand. And we don't know. I don't know what the future will hold. You just have to hope.
I have so many thoughts on this, and this is an episode about the long walk. And we can, like, if you want to hear our political podcast, we'll be launching that, I'm sure, here soon. But
no, we've always that's always been sort of backdoored into this podcast, honestly.
I just, at the end of the day, there is a vocal, I would say, minority of people who are blinded by the authority that this figure represents, in this case, Donald Trump. And I think that we're in a scenario now where, yes, I do think that leveler heads will prevail eventually. And that's the scary part, is that, like, he's going to push the envelope. He's going to do all of these things that are, like, unequivocally un-American, just un-American. Things that defy the Constitution that these people are meant to defend. And that's what you're talking about, is I hope that at some point
they're challenging it in the courts, which, like, you hope the courts will hold up and will actually act as a counter, but so many times they've failed.
At some point they don't care.
Well, and he's also been placing his people everywhere he can in positions of authority. He's trying, like, he's full on trying an authoritarian takeover of this government, and time will tell whether or not he succeeds.
And it's scary. And that's why, like, look, we have a podcast about adaptations, but, like, at the end of the day, like, if you see it, you have to say something about it. And I feel like it's important to, especially in this times, like, if you're a fan of the podcast, Luke's city that he lives in is possibly going to have military members in it
deployed against the citizens.
And that's a scary thing. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you think is going on. You can go to the city and you can see for yourself, but it's scary to think that, like, these kinds of things are just, like, and this is a story that is not unique, right? Like, DC, it's happened in DC, it's happened throughout the country,
happening in all the major, liberal bastions. It's all places that he is politically unpopular. It's so transparent.
It's been transparent from the beginning, and it's so frustrating. And I think anyone who's familiar with history can see that this is the playbook and this is what's happening. And, like, we just have to resist, keep our loved ones safe, do everything you can to try to outlast this, and just call bullshit on it. Because when you call bullshit and you show it for how ridiculous it is, they lose power.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm scared for people. I'm scared for the state of the world right now, but we'll just have to do what many generations have done before us.
Yeah. Well, let's get back to the long walk. That's the topic at hand. I agree. But, this is King writing at a time that was also very politically fraught. And he wrote this very bleak novel that was, I think, sort of an assessment and a look at the sort of culture that was, around him. And, he had a message here. And it plays out through these characters. So what did you think of Raymond Garrity from Maine?
Well, switching topics here, like switching vibes, at least for sure. So this is the first King story, Bachman story, that I've read since going to Maine. Like, I've been to Maine now, which is a place that you've visited many, many times, and your family has. So I was able to visit, and like, it's amazing. It's gorgeous. And it's like such a cool place that is in this country. And it's cool to like now seat all of those Stephen King stories there, like put all of them there.
Yeah.
And this one takes place like through the countryside, it seems, of Maine.
They like start on the Canadian border and just walk down the state, and like it seems like it's done along US 1. I don't know that it's ever named, but it goes through all like the major towns that we've been to,
US 1 and I-95 are mentioned, which like anybody who lives up and down the East Coast, like those are like the major highways, and it's funny how all of that.
Yeah, that's the other thing, is they're not allowed to leave the road.
Yeah.
They leave the road, instant death.
Our main character. So to talk about him, I think that he's a bit entranced by this idea of this whole thing. He has like,
he doesn't really know why he's there. I feel like
he goes into it and has like, he has an idea of like what he's there for, and he's like, oh, my mom, I'm saying bye to my mom, and he talks about this girl eventually. But at first, like, he doesn't have a motivation to be there. And a lot of other people, he starts to realize, like, do have a motivation. And, like, that's going to be their guiding light to keep them motivated. And so he tries to, like, create a motivation for himself, like, on the fly while we're there with him.
It kind of is competing with that Stebbins character.
Yeah.
It's, like, one of his motivations. Like, certain characters that he just decides certain people he wants to outlast. He's like, I'm going to outlast this guy. This guy sucks.
Right. It reads so adolescent or juvenile to me, right? Like,
I forget which character it is, but one of them says to him, like, you don't have a reason, and if you don't have a reason, you're not going to make it. Like, you're not going to win this.
And so he goes in as like a boy. Like, he goes in and just doesn't know what he wants out of this and like why he's there or anything like that. And as time goes on, things become more real. Like the first, like, what is it called? Like, they get their ticket or whatever.
When they get their ticket,
the first time that happens, and the reveal is like, they keep talking about like, oh, he's going to get his ticket. He's going to get his ticket. And even for the reader, if you didn't know, like, there is a reveal in this where it's like, oh, he's going to get his ticket. And then he got his ticket, which meant get fucking killed by mostly by guns. People. Yeah.
Shoot them.
Gun down. Not only are these characters all on this like grueling thing, but like psychologically they're watching 99. Well, some of them are like downrange or whatever, like they're farther away and they don't see it. But oftentimes they see these people drop dead and get murdered.
Or it happens somewhere behind them and they just hear it. There's a lot of these like he just hears the guns go off like pretty frequently.
And there's so much like down as the story progresses, like there's so many times where he's like, what I wouldn't give to just be off this ride, what I wouldn't give to just have not started in the first place. And you're like, you could have just not done it. Like it's such an interesting thing.
Like,
and that's like, I think a commentary on like, make sure your reason for doing it is strong, because like he, at points he's like, I wish I wouldn't have done this. And that's just like a unfortunate thing when you're 50 people deep and 50 people are dead. And psychologically, one of the craziest things is as night falls, like anytime night falls, I wasn't expecting two things. I wasn't expecting night to be such an impactful sort of time, but of course it would be. You have no light. It seems like I would have thought like the headlights from the trucks and everything nearby would have helped, but he describes it as like pitch black and they're all fumbling through it.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that like I just kind of, for whatever naive reason, assumed that it was going to be a flat walk the whole time. But there's plenty of hills, and you start thinking about like maintaining 4 miles
an hour. Yeah,
4 miles an hour is easy when you're on a flat road. But as soon as you start getting up into hills and mountains, and you've been doing it for 24 hours straight, you're like, okay, now it seems like this is impossible.
Yeah. So touching back on what you were talking about, like the sort of naivete they're all displaying, they have this conversation at one point where they're like, it's like they know that people die during this walk. But he's like, I kind of expected the guns to like shoot out little flags that say bang.
It's a great moment, yeah.
It's like it wasn't real until now I'm here and I'm seeing it, and it's so stark. And like that to me tells me something about American society of that time. I guess today, like overall, people have been desensitized to violence, but I would argue that most people are quite aware of it. Right, like with all the shootings that we are still dealing with, right? Like knowing that people can and do die in brutal ways. Many people see videos of it on their phones.
I mean, recently there was a very major one
Yeah.
that I think shocked the world, and
Sure.
That's like part of the reason why I think that one impacted so many people is like oftentimes it's like you hear about this on a news article or something, but like seeing it happen impacts people differently, and there's a lot baked into that. Yeah,
It's brutal. Back then, I mean, maybe it was a rarer thing probably to see. So at the very least, I think he's tapping into probably the attitudes of some soldiers who are excited to enlist and are excited to go fight even. And it's only once they get there and the violence happens and they see their friends die does it become real in a different way. And I think that's what he's touching in on there. And yeah, I mean, like maybe it's naive, but like we're talking about young kids, so if they are naive, and I think that's the point.
Well, and I think they want to prove themselves too, right?
Yeah.
Like they want to have a glorious like sort of purpose, and I think that anybody wants to find their purpose on this world.
Yeah.
And like I think it's an alluring thing that young men have gone through and still probably do.
And when you say prove yourself, I think that's key too, because as we've touched on a little bit already, I think masculinity is at the heart of this. And that's I think a distinctly masculine sort of pressure. The pressure to prove your manliness. That patriarchy sort of pushes onto the men in our society. And a lot of people will sign up for this kind of thing for Vietnam, for example, although many were drafted, but like will sign up for military service or will sign up to do some sort of violent act because they feel the need to prove themselves, to prove their manliness to the world. And how that is tied into our sexuality. You want to be virile. You want to be able to show that you are a strong, dangerous person who is capable of violence because you have been convinced that means you will be a desirable mate, right? And that will lead you to get the things you want in life, lead you to get women, which are viewed in a very sort of objectified way in this book. These boys are thinking about them as like a commodity that they will win through their display of their masculinity. And I'm saying this isn't shown in a positive light, and in fact, almost every time this is shown, it's linked to death. Like it's constantly being linked to death and the destruction of self. So I think he's showing how sort of toxic this is and how it's used to manipulate these guys.
Yeah. And you were saying before about violence equals like some sort of value.
Yeah.
But I think it's also like it's a grasping at strength more than it's violence, right? It's like and I think there's like a couple avenues. I think there's a strength in not being violent but still being strong, and I think that's where, in some sense, if I was just talking about
that's where the true strength comes through.
Right. And that's where if you're just talking about masculinity on a spectrum of like you can show strength through violence or you can show strength through restraint. There's like a few ways that you can show this quote unquote strength that I think people would be looking at, like a strong silent type. Doesn't have to prove anything through violence. This is like an archetype, right? And yet there is also the type that's like hyper violent, and there's something there that's like dangerous, and like there's like a safety in that. Like if we're to just go back to like ancient times of like if you're able to do violent acts, maybe it's some sort of like signal that you are able to provide, or you're able to kill and bring back food or protect, all of those kinds of things. And yet there is also something strong, like if we're to talk about the modern day, there's something strong about understanding when it's necessary for those kinds of things, why it would be necessary, or why it wouldn't be necessary. Right. And I think that's like ultimately like this book is showing the easy avenue of if I can prove myself in X, Y, or Z way, if I can be the last one here, if I can outlast everyone, outsmart everybody, then I will be desirable, or I will have like signaled strength.
Yeah.
And I think it's just like interesting to think of young people dealing with that problem, and how sometimes the easy shortcut is to be violent or show some sort of like physical action to prove it.
Well, let's talk about what happens in this book, and then we can sort of fill in our thoughts. I have even more thoughts about that as we round this out. So, as the walk progresses over several days, the physical and psychological toll becomes increasingly severe. Walkers collapse from fatigue, lose their sanity, or are pushed to violence. One boy tears out his own throat in a breakdown, while others try to provoke or sabotage their peers. Gary Barkovich emerges as a malicious presence, while the more sympathetic Scram, an older and initially favored contestant, becomes gravely ill. Before he dies, the remaining boys agree that whoever wins will support Scram's pregnant widow with part of their prize. Eventually, only Garrity and Stebbins remain. Stebbins, who reveals he is the illegitimate son of the Major, collapses and dies as Garrity approaches to quit. Though declared the winner, Garrity is seemingly unaware of his victory. Surrounded by celebration and the Major's approach, he continues walking toward a dark figure in the distance, detached from reality but still moving forward, somehow finding the strength to run. Let's back up here and talk about the relationship that forms, because we've been talking about masculinity and all these pressures that patriarchy sort of puts on it, these toxic ideas are imposing. And yet, one of the sort of positive things that develops with these boys is the friendships, right? And we see them clinging to these. We see, I forget which character it is, but there's the one character who gets in an argument with another early on, and they kind of have a scuffle, and the boy ends up getting killed. And from then on, a lot of the others kind of ostracize him, and they call him killer, and they blame him for that death. And that starts to drive him mad, because he's like, I don't want to die with no friends. Like, I got to have friends. Mm-hmm. And the musketeers form, right? Like, this is a certain group of people who know each other that Garrity is sort of the leader or part of. And it's their camaraderie that keeps them going. Yes, we do see some people who are sort of outside of that and who sort of walk on their own. But I think one of the more positive things you see develop is these friendships. And then specifically with McVrees and Garrity, McVrees saves him several times, saves his life several times.
Well, mutually, I think they save each other.
Well, eventually at the end, when he feels like he needs to pay him back, he tries to save his life at the end.
So McVrees at one point is going after the soldiers, and it has like a 3 count, and then our main character goes after him and pulls him along.
Oh, yeah,
so there is like a back and forth.
So there's a couple of times, yeah. But that's maybe not as direct as what ends up happening later. Right. And McVrees directly saves him. So this is all tied up in this idea of homosexuality, because the sort of the specter of that is raised, because our society doesn't know, and I would argue this is still true, it doesn't know how to deal with platonic, deep male friendships. And so often men don't know how to deal with it, men don't know how to develop them, to maintain them. And it's because often there's this accusation that can loom that if you are that close with someone, it must be romantic. And also the idea that even if it was, that's bad, right? Like, and this is dealt with in this book because Garrity has this memory of this like boy that he had like fooled around with when he was a young child, and he'd had this sort of homosexual experimentation with, and then he violently turned against it eventually, like hitting the other boy with a gun, I think, which is I think quite pointed, and sort of distancing himself from it, right? And he gets threatened by his mother. This is another sign of like how these systems can be enforced by people, even the people we love, because his mother threatens him that if he does it again, he's going to be forced to walk naked through the town. Which again, what is he doing? He's walking, and he's exposed to society. He's not naked, but he's in many ways he's laid bare to them, right? So this has kind of become the reality of his current life. So he's threatened with this, And so it's equated with being wrong and bad. And whether or not he actually is, on some spectrum of, queerness, I don't know.
Right.
But he won't allow himself to even consider it, really. And it seems like McVrees kind of does, and he doesn't really know how to feel about that. At the very least, they have this close platonic friendship. And at a certain point, they've gone so far and so much has happened, they all take this like oath with each other that they're no longer going to help each other. That is such an interesting moment because you can kind of see why it would occur, because they just want this to be over, and that's just kind of prolonging things. But also it's like antithetical to everything that they've been developing, right? It's antithetical to the idea of friendship, to the idea that like he owes McFreeze because McFreeze has saved his life several times. And sure enough, when it comes down to McFreeze's moment, he's going to sit down and basically commit suicide because he says he's just done. He does try and talk him out of it. He tries to convince him to keep going. He tries to save him, and would have been successful except for in this moment McFreeze says, no, I'm done.
That whole scenario is very interesting too, because he chooses it and he almost accepts it, and like what is being said there, and by sitting and accepting it after all of this toil and all of this work that you've gone through to be like one of the final people and to say, you know what, I'm done. But then, like you said, also this moment of like him going and trying to save McVreeze is like,
it's a rejection of this
going against the oath of what he said, and at the same time, like, to what end? Because at some point it's got to end. One person's gonna make it.
But if this is all pointless, right, then these moments matter in the same. It's like that's that existentialist question of like, if there is no purpose to life, we have to create it for ourselves.
Totally.
You know what I mean? It's a sort of a Camus talks about this, and talks about like creating meaning for yourself. Some other philosophers definitely do too, and I think that's kind of what he's touching on here. Like, yes, this is meaningless, and yes, this just prolongs our suffering, but like that's kind of life, and like these moments do matter, or if you choose to make them matter.
They could spend more time together and foster that friendship a little more. And like, even if both of the, like, it is almost like inconsequential, but at the same time, it's the complete opposite. At the same time, it's like the most important thing, because it's like if both of them die, then that's all they had left was trying to do what they could and trying to make the best of their situation and trying to be together in that way. And I think it's interesting too to bring up some of that, because there's even like moments of like McVreeze says something about like kissing him or something. There's like
they have this whole part where he's like, what if I do want to get with you?
And I think that is interesting to sort of navigate. And I think it's especially in like the 60s and 70s. And like, I think today, I don't know, I think of my friend group and how like we are like, I don't know, there's something about sexuality where it's like, there was like a taboo of like, and even when I was a kid in the 90s and in the early 2000s, like there's so much of that of like being like gay, you're gay. And
that was like, it's like the schoolyard accusation bullying thing that you would get if you ever showed affection for another boy, if you ever perceived as being too close to another boy, it would be an accusation.
And there's a spectrum there, obviously, in terms of like caring for someone, like physically wanting someone, and attraction to somebody. There's so many different ways that can go. And like, I think that like, of course, people fall differently on that spectrum, but the idea of like risking like deep, meaningful friendships due to like homophobia or something like that, due to, you know what I mean, due to like not saying I love you, or not hugging, not being physical because somebody might perceive you a certain way, is so I don't know, alien to me at this point. But I think also like there's like a security in masculinity, if you truly are, if you're like, that's not someone I'm attracted to, there's a security in knowing that, and that you can be physical with that person, you can be around that person, and you don't have to care about perceptions of how that falls. But like there still is a pressure. And I think it's interesting
that's what I was gonna say. Like even like, so like I like to think that this is something that I have tried to rise above in my life, and that I am aware of, and that I have analyzed about myself. And I look at it and say like, oh, this is all the way society is pressuring me to behave in certain ways. And yet, just being aware of those pressures doesn't make them non-existent, because they are there. and they are there in male friend groups all the time. And whether or not you let them control you is something you can have some sort of agency in, but that doesn't mean that you're not feeling them and that you're not necessarily like worried about them or even subconsciously playing into some of those fears and like, oh, I want to make sure I don't make someone feel uncomfortable, but really what is it that I'm worried about? And really it's often this, yeah.
And it's a great point too, because I was being short-sighted and thinking about like a super close, tight-knit group of friends versus like,
but like if you make a new friend with somebody,
if I make a new friend, that sort of idea of like growing that bond to then be that comfortable versus like, you know, like you said, making people uncomfortable and what other people may be perceiving and coming into a relationship with.
And men in particular struggle with this more than women do. Like that's one of the things, I mean, I think everybody can look around and see that women and you know, this is obviously not true for everybody, but in general, women seem to be able to make close friendships with strong bonds much more easily as adults than men do. And I think this is one of the reasons why at the heart of it. So I love that this book is about all of this in sort of it's a pretty direct way, but it's enough to where you don't necessarily realize it at first. But by the end of it, when you look back at it, you can kind of see it.
Well, ultimately, it's so funny because it's a book about people walking for a long time.
Yeah.
And like, look at all the ways that it's had us talking about it.
And it's super violent, and it's got some really gross moments. There's a guy who gets shot through the abdomen, and he's like running along with his intestines spilling out, and it's like, it's fucking gross. And like,
well, and to talk about like the typical Stephen King fare, right? Is like, you think, at least I did, especially growing up. I think there's been many examples of it not being this way, but supernatural things happening in a King story. Like I'm going in looking for the supernatural. And so of course I go in and I'm looking at this compulsion to join, this compulsion to walk, this compulsion, like what it is in that like what demons this major has or what this, like who's in charge of this and for what gain and everything like that. And then ultimately the story ends with this sort of like shadowy entity that of course hallucinations are going to be happening and all of that we can talk about what we think the hallucination is.
Yeah, I mean, like in one way you can look at this as like a King detail. Is this an actual entity? But I think we haven't seen any evidence of the supernatural in this book. Otherwise,
no. But I'm just saying, like I was looking for it, and then by the end, there's a shadowy figure, and I'm like, I have to think in the larger Stephen King universe. Maybe this could be something.
I don't know if the Bachman novels technically fit into that. They might not.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
But so you can also look at this, I think, metaphorically too, right? Like it's so telling that even after Stebbins dies, he doesn't think it's over. He thinks there's someone else that he still is competing with.
Right.
This figure. He thinks it's another walker specifically that's up ahead, and he doesn't realize he's won. And I don't know. I think it's telling that even in the end, he doesn't get that release. And that running at the end is an interesting moment because I'm not sure exactly what it's meant to entail, because this is what we get instead of the release of victory. But it's like, is he trying to catch up to this figure? What is he doing here? Is it almost a self-destructive act? Because you have to imagine at this point it can't be a good idea to run with like the shape his legs and feet must be in.
I had a couple reads on it. The first being like sort of the supernatural look at it is like this idea of like everything around him has been people dying and all this other stuff. So of course like a specter, a shadow is making me think like, is this death? Is he still going to end up dying just due to like the elements and the what he's put his body through? Is like is he running towards death?
Yeah.
Like does he
finish
the race
kind of death? Yeah.
And does he run and use the last of his energy and then we don't see it on the page
maybe
but
he dies.
collapse and die? I don't know. Definitely. That's a read that I had. The other read that I had was like,
well, at one point he says something about like being a dead man, the dead man who won. It's like almost like a premonition. So yeah, you could definitely read it that way.
And then there's also like the idea of like a hallucination or like a madness taking over somebody after all of this happening. And like psychologically, he's seen all of these people die for
could it be McVrees? Could it just be like the souls of the dead?
Sure.
Like sort of manifested.
But I just think you get to a point where like your body, your mind, your brain is given up. And I wonder if it's just like he's just something snapped and he's into madness and he will, again, maybe
I was surprised he didn't like engage with the Major at all. I was expecting some sort of confrontation there, and no. In fact, he doesn't even like look at him. He's just like keeps going.
We talked about a similar kind of ending with Starship Troopers' last project, right? So it's like this idea like the war continues. It's ever continuing. The ending of that story, it just keeps going.
But that was supposed to be positive.
I don't know.
Well,
I don't know.
It depends on if we're talking
movie
movie or book. But like in the book, it was supposed to be like, and he's on to fight the next fight. Whereas this is like, oh God, he's still walking. Stop him.
Well, and I think there's a commentary of like whether if we're talking about the Vietnam War, if we're talking about whatever whatever you decide to say it's a metaphor for, you can see this idea of like a never-ending struggle, or a system that's set you up to always lose, or a system that's set you up to keep reaching for the carrot forever, and maybe you'll never get it.
So let's talk about Stebbins a little bit, and then we can wrap this up, because Stebbins is a really interesting character. He is the loner at the beginning. He's showing that he's really smart. I love that he had this sort of strategy where he's like, I'm going to walk until I get my first warning very early on, so that I can like set the pace for myself and know like just at the edge in which I need to walk. He's revealed to be the Major's illegitimate son, but that's way late in the novel when we find that out. And he says that he is actually the rabbit. As he compares himself to like the dog races where they would send out a rabbit. He's like, I'm the rabbit, and true to life, like this walk is the farthest any has ever gotten. I think it was like setting a record for how far it had gotten. And so the idea was that he was the rabbit because he had studied and like been following these walks, and like he knew everything. He had all the strategy. He served to make everyone else go farther. Right. And I think that's like a commentary on human nature. And also like he is a loner, and yet he does interact with the others, and he does talk to Garrity some, and Garrity, literally, the only reason I think Garrity wins is because he wants to go tell Stebbins personally that he's going to quit. He could have just quit, but he's like, no, I got to go catch up to Stebbins and tell him, you've won. I'm going to quit. And it's when he touches him that Stebbins turns to him and just dies, basically, like loses his mind and dies. And so it's only through this act of like that personal connection that Garrity demonstrates, because I would say that's Garrity's one strength and one sort of superpower throughout all of this, is that he is willing to engage with other people. He's willing to become friends with people. He's willing to talk to other people. And it's through his sort of interpersonal ties that he is sort of dragged along, and that he develops meaning for himself along the way, essentially. And his ties to McVrees saves him, because at times where he would have died, like when he was going to die with Jan, when he runs up to her, he's like, I'm just going to give up now. McVrees pulls him away from that, right? Like that would have been his moment at the very least.
Right.
Yeah, those two characters, it's really interesting that it comes down to those two, and I'm left now just thinking like, this is such a good book. I really like it. It's a little too fresh for me to like say where it falls in line of like my King novels, but this is a really good one. And
probably my favorite Bachman we read for the podcast.
It's my favorite Bachman for sure. But I'm really curious now as we go into this movie to see what they might have changed, because there's so many little things here, especially at the end and how everything turns out, where I'm like, this really worked for this book that we read, but again, this is a movie that's coming out 2025. Might the messaging be a little different? I don't know. Could the end be a little different? I don't know. I'm really curious to see.
I, for some reason, feel like they're going to play down a lot of this weird, like, virginal sort of, like, sex stuff, and, like, him ejaculating in his pants, him ejaculating and continuing to walk.
Yeah, imagining the hills as breasts, and, like, it's all very Oedipal, and, like, thinking about his mother, and, like, just all kinds of stuff. Yeah, it's very, very sexual. I don't know. Maybe we'll get some of it, but I suspect we won't get as much of it.
Well, I have heard good things about this film, though, and I am excited to go see it in theaters, another theater going experience.
Absolutely.
That's always worth going for. And King adaptation. We love covering King.
So that'll be next week, but if you enjoyed this episode covering Richard Bachman and The Long Walk, let us know in the form of a rating and review on whatever app you chose to listen on. If you are on YouTube, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment. Engagement is good for the algorithm, so let us know what you thought of this novel, if you've read it, if you've read other Bachman novels. Is this the best Bachman novel? I don't know. I'm curious, because I don't think I've read any of the other Bachman novels, so I'm curious. But yeah, we'd love to hear from you in the comments below.
And be sure to connect with us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, TikTok, all of those at Ink to Film. And really, you can find us on any social media platform with that handle.
We also have a Patreon if you'd like to support this podcast financially, which would help keep us going, keep us on our long walk of recording these episodes. That makes it sound a lot more grueling than it really is. But we would love to have your support over there. We release bonus episodes on there. We had a recent episode where we were interviewing a bunch of former guests on the sort of convention grounds for Worldcon. So that was a really fun, kind of unique video that is on our Patreon right now. We'd love to have your support over there for as little as $2.
And thank you to Ross Bugden for the use of our intro and outro music.
All right, that's going to be it for this week. We got a long walk to go, but we'll be back next week to cover the film and cast our final judgment on which one was better, book or movie. But until next time,
keep adapting.